So the first thing I'm going to do, let me make sure I have my stuff set up here. I'm going to make sure that the download that I just did, which is under my downloads, goes into the folder that I have set up. So if I go to File, Open Scene, I should be able to find Advanced Animation, TR, Space. Okay, that's where I want that to go. So I'm going to hit File, Set Project, E. Obviously, this is different for you. Space. I'm going to set that, and now I'm going to File, Open Scene, and Start. I've got this thing. This is a prefab, so to speak, for you guys to be able to use. This has normal maps. This has a bunch of different little nodes that are set up in it. I'll show you that right here. Under my AI standard, I have things like albedo, specular, some glow, some gloss. If you want to tweak any of that, that's fine. I think it's okay the way this looks. If I look at it under Arnold, you can see, let me turn on interactive, or 3D manipulation. You can see that it has some glow and some other fun stuff on that. So I like this, but if I want this to be in space, and if I just look at space images, if I look at space, I want it to feel colorful. I don't want it to be this bland, just black and white, or I guess that's kind of colorful compared to just like the regular star effect, right? So I want to have some color on my background. So maybe blues and pinks could be a fun thing with some oranges on there. Right now, the representation of this image is just flat kind of lighting on it in one single light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my attribute editor for this first light, and I'm going to add some color to it. So maybe this is going to be like an orange light. And I'm going to also make sure that I have my Arnold render view up. And when I'm working on this, I'm going to look through the selection of this light and change where that is, making sure that's on. I like kind of where that is for my primary light. Maybe it's a little too orange, so I can change that. Okay. Now I'm going to go back into panels, perspective, to get out of that light shape. It still needs some more lighting. So let's give some more lights. I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'm going to spin that around. And again, panels, look through selected. So there's the front, there's the top. I'm going to go over here, and let's give some color to it. So let's say this one might have some pink. So maybe in the background of my image, if I'm looking at this, there's some pinks and blues that I want to have to go across the rim lighting of this. So I'm going to go into here and change this to be maybe like a pink. And let's make sure we're looking at this from the right angle. If I'm looking at this from my perspective, we should see how that's going. Okay. It's got a little bit of a rim on there. Push that down a little bit. Okay. Now I'm starting to think if my image is more blues and pinks, maybe that this top one should be a little bit more blue. So, easily change that one out. Okay. This one, let's increase some of the intensity on that light. I like that. Now I'm going to make one more. So duplicate and rotate. I'm going to have this kind of pointing at the back to give some lighting a little bit underneath the ship and coming near the engines on that. Making sure that this is pointing at it. I'm going to go in here and then let me give myself a really, really bright blue from the back. So my intensity right now and my exposure was pretty low. I want that to be up a little higher. And I'm going to play with this. So I have something I think that I can use that maybe would match with a ship that would go through something like that. So I'm starting to think maybe this top one. Let's bring that a little bit closer to the pink area. So we're going to go maybe something like that. So for the sake of not taking a gazillion years and showing you guys this demo, I'm going to say that this is done. All right, we'll pretend that we like all these settings for now, and let's animate this thing. So I'm going to turn off, let me go back into reset that workspace. Okay, I'm going to turn off the render view. It's gone, so I reset the view. Now, if I start to animate this thing, first thing I should do is have a camera. So I'm going to make a camera. So cameras, camera with a name. Let's move this over, and let's make sure that we can work with this to see it. So I'm going to go into that camera. And now that I have that camera, I'm going to go and turn on, I'm going to press tear off. So I want this camera to be visible, and then I also want to be able to work in my perspective. That just allows me to be able to see stuff a little bit better. So I'm going to just adjust where this camera is situated. I have that aim, and then I have the actual camera that I'm moving around here. I have my spaceship. And let's move this back in out of frame. So it's out of frame. Maybe if we have this thing like the demo pop up like it's coming through a wormhole. Let me turn off my grid so I can see better. Let me kind of come up with that same idea where it's small. So it just came out of the wormhole right here, and then maybe at frame. So if this is good, let's change this to 30 frames per second. And let's say that at 60 frames it'll pass by. So that's going to be in 2 seconds. So in 2 seconds that's gone. We're going to take that thing and bring it over and position it so it looks like it's flying by our camera. Okay, so that flew by the camera. I'm going to hit S again, and now if I hit play, I should see something too fast, and play blast, great. I love when it does that. We'll go back in the camera, and then I'm going to change my playback speed to real time, and then we'll hit play. So let's see what that does. Okay. Let's save ourselves all that time by not having to see anything else but 60 frames. And now that we have this, we can play this back. Let's fix some of this stuff. Right now, it's showing up, but let's make it kind of show off for the camera. So all we're going to do is, by the time it gets past our camera, let me go into 2-pane, change this one to be camera now. So I have camera and I have this. I'm going to rotate this a little bit. So now when it goes by, it goes from being kind of upright to, let's change that. So upright to tilting towards the camera. So just give it a little bit more interest. Or interesting look to the way the ship is flying. Okay, issues. My lighting isn't coming with it. Now, fun fact about space, there's no lights in space. So everything you see for space, anything, is fake. Fine, I'm okay with that. first thing we got to do is kind of get this these lights around our subject in a way that it makes sense. I'm going to go into Arnold. I should have done this before I started animating, but whatever. Let's look at what this looks like. Okay, it's dark because none of that is matching up. So how do we fix this? I'm going to go into perspective. I'm going to take these lights. I know where they are. I'm just going to grab all of these. And then just move them so they are back to where they were supposed to be. And it's pretty close. Let's turn on Arnold Render and render that. Okay. So let's look at it from the proper camera, which is camera shape. Okay. And I just made that do that. Okay. So kind of okay. We'll just individually fix some of these. Okay. I'm going to say I like that for sake of time. I'm going to grab all of these. So hold down Shift and then grab our object, hit P. And now wherever that goes, this should maintain that lighting on it. So if I'm at this frame or at this frame or that frame, they should all follow. Now, there's a glitch in Maya where it's not looking like it's following until you click on the object and it's there. It's actually working. I think this has to do with our cache playback. Let's just do software cache. Okay, it looks like it is catching up. It's still laggy. This should be okay for our render. So just be aware that if your lights don't look like they're moving, click on the object, it'll catch up. All right, let's do one last thing before we render this thing out. I want to be able to simulate an engine glow. And since the engine glow, there is already an engine glow happening on the back of my ship. It's doing it in a way that I'm never going to see this in After Effects. I'm not going to be able to use that. So to be able to fix that, I'm just going to make a cube. And I'm going to move this over to behind my spaceship. I'm going to put that over here. And I'm going to scale this up. And move this over. Okay. Now it doesn't need to be anything fancy. It just needs to be a shape. And I'm going to duplicate that shape. And move it over to the other engine. Alright, so I've got two of these things. Kind of want them to be similar spot. I'm going to combine them. Engine exhaust. Hopefully that's how you spell it. I'm going to give it a material. I'm just going to use an easy cheesy shader from Arnold, and that's going to be standard surface. And I'm going to give it a incandescent bulb. From here, go all the way down to emission and change that. I'm going to make that a blue exhaust. I'm also going to go up to my specular and kill the specular, so it's just this color. Now that I have that, I'll assign it to it. And now I am going to parent that to here. So anywhere that goes, it's going to follow. Now, I want that one hidden for my main render. And I'm going to go into, let's first look at what this is going to look like when it renders. So it shows up, goes by. Select this, go to my Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And let's have it start slow and then speed up. So let's say all of these should be set so we're going to break those, and let's just look at this one, that one. So slow to fast, and this one, slow to fast. So, okay, let's look what that did. Okay, good. So slowly showing up and then blasting by the camera. All right, I like that. I'm just going to quickly adjust a little bit, just in case of the ship, the glow shows up there. I want that to kind of not interact with my final render. I want that to completely be gone. That should be fine where that's going. Yep. Okay. Last but not least, let's render. So I'm going to go into my rendering setup. I'm going to go into render, render sequence, camera 1. Let's give it a home. It's going to go where it's supposed to go. Let's say our time. It's going to be 1 to 60, so EXR. Name, number, extension, and 1 to 60. Change the camera. Make sure it's camera. We'll hit close. 960 by 540 is good. Close that, and then hit render sequence. And that's going to start going. Now that that's going, I'm going to go into After Effects and make space. So to do that, I'm going to go into a new composition. And this composition needs to be 960 by 540. That's what I'm working with my other stuff. And it's also going to be 30 frames per second. So I'm setting these up. Now, I only need this to be maybe about 5 seconds long. So giving myself 30 seconds is insane. I'm going to hit OK on this. I've got this set up. It is from 0 to 5 seconds long now. And let's start to create some stars. First thing I need to do is make a solid. So right click and make solid is the first thing we would add in After Effects. So inside of After Effects, these are kind of our layers under the comp. This is making a new layer that's going to be solid. This will be black. This will be our background layer. So we can even call that background. Now I'm going to go right click, new, solid. I'm going to make white. And we'll call this stars. And I'll hit OK. From here, I'm going to type CC star. And maybe a space is needed. Let's just type in starburst. Okay, there it is. Why don't you show up? CC star, there we go. So CC starburst, drag that into the layer. Just drag it right here, stars. Okay, cheesy stars. We're gonna fix this. First thing I wanna do is make these smaller. So I also wanna get my speed down to 0, so they're not moving. And scale these things down. Way better. Now that I have that, if I hit the spacebar to play, they're not moving anymore. So they're static. That's good. However, I want some stars to move so we have some dimensionality to this background. I'm going to take this thing and just hit Control-C, Control-V, and now I have another layer of stars, and it has the effect already applied there. From here, I'm going to change my speed to maybe being at 0.2, and if I were to hit play now, okay, that's weird, because we have one that's moving and one that's not. Let's drop that down to 0.02, and from here, we should see very little movement. It's very subtle, but it's duplicating all the stars we've made. Let's fix that. I'm going to change the scatter. So they're no longer all in the same location. Much better. So scatter helps to change the location. The speed changes the level of it. Notice it's very, very little amount of speed I have on there. And then now, I'm also going to change my size on these. I'm going to increase that just a little bit. Okay, now let's look what we got. Okay, I'm going to actually give this a 0.1. So even reducing that amount of animation on here, we just want something subtle. Some of the best effects aren't even noticeable. So that's something to realize is if you did it right, it shouldn't be catching your eye because that's not the primary subject. The subject is the spaceship. So I like that. One thing we can do if we wanted to add color to this is we can just type in curves and drag that over that layer. Now that we have a layer that has curves on that, we can modify the RBG by moving some of these around. And you'll notice subtly it's changing some of the color on it. It's not an over-the-top amount. So you can see a little bit of color there. So I'll leave that alone. I think that's going to be kind of fancy. now that I have all these things, so I have pink stars and some white stars there, I'm going to create a nebula. And to be able to create a nebula, I'm going to go into my layers over here, right click, go new, solid. Let's make that black again. Hit OK, and now this time I'm going to type in flare. Drag this into here. Okay, flares are really cool because it looks like there's a lens flare occurring on our screen. That's kind of the name of it, right? So I'm going to screw this thing up so it doesn't look like that anymore. First thing I'm going to do is change the type. Let's use this one. And I'm going to put this in the middle of my screen. So you can change that by using your flare center. And from here, I'm going to go into Effect, and there should be Distort, and then we want to add Turbulent Displace. So we're going to push that on there. And then from here, you'll notice if I change the amount, it'll modify how that looks. It'll get more displaced. But what I want to do first is increase the size of it, and then increase my complexity to the point where we break it. So what I'm making here is like a mini universe, or a nebula. And so I took that flare and then made it so it fanned itself out. I can modify the evolution of that thing a little bit so it can look like it's moving. You can play around with these settings. So there's a lot of stuff that we can play with for this. I think this is actually pretty nice for that. What I'm going to do now, let's say we have that. Let's add some color to it. So I'm going to take that and again change the color by using curves. I'm going to drag that over here again. And now let's go RGB. We're going to change red. I'm going to grab this middle one. Blue. Maybe pull that down. And our green. Something like that. All right, let's go back in time and hit play. There's no movement on that. So let's give a little bit of a subtle move to the nebula. And to do that, we're going to animate the evolution. So I'm going to click on this stopwatch, go to the end, and then move that. Now that added 2 keyframes here for me. If I hit play, let this build, and then have that play back again. Maybe a little too subtle. So we'll add a little bit more of movement to this. And then now you should see something like this happening when we play. So I like that. I don't want to have too much on there. I think that's a pretty good one. Now, let's say I go at about here. I'm going to take this thing and I am going to change the blending mode of it. And to do that, right now, my blending mode, just like in our layers in Photoshop, we can change that by right-clicking, going to blending mode, and I'm going to change that to screen. And now, all of a sudden, it's got the stars in the background and this thingamajig in the foreground. It's starting to look kind of cool. Let's say that this isn't where we wanted to put it. Well, that's an easy thing. We can literally click on where that flare was generated and move that off. Now you might get weird angels showing up. That's great. So this little bit and being able to modify it, it's pretty cool. Now that I have one of these, that's an easy way to make another one. So I'll just hit Control-C, Control-V, and I have another one. I'll generate that over here this time. And I'm going to change the color. So since we have this lens flare, the turbulent displace, and the curves, I'm going to take those curves now and shift around some of those colors so I have maybe some blue. Yeah, the purpley blue. So just trying to think about how to match with what I already had in there. So if I hit play, this has to build. That's why that green is showing up. And once that builds, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about for these two layers. I don't like that little bit of black that shows up there, so we'll change some of that. So when you see that black occurring, where was that? Right here. That's usually because the amount needs to either be scaled upwards or downwards on one of these that we've created. I think that's actually the other one, which is this one right here. And we scale that down, and that one, there we go. We've eliminated that weird little effect, and then I just wrecked it with the other one. Let's fix that one. So there we go. So now that I have that, next step, we can add another one over there. I'm not actually going to do that. I'm going to go into flare again. I'm going to add that over here. So put a flare in, and I'm going to take that flare and maybe move that so it's like over here, over there. Just to simulate maybe a sun or something in there. And let's give that color. Actually, let's put this flare on its own layer. So let's go into right click, new, solid, okay. Can't see anything yet, that's fine. I'll put a flare in here. I'm gonna move that location to here and put in curves. So I'm gonna drag that into here and increase my red. Just a little bit, and then maybe my green. Okay, just changing that up a little bit. I'm going to change this again to screen. So right click on that layer and go to blending mode, screen. Okay, we've kind of filled up the space now, made it a little more fancy. Now, we should have this thing that rendered out, and it rendered out my frames, and let's make sure that it is there. There they are. I'm going to take all these and let me go to that into, just to keep this organized. So my renders, so under images, here all those are. Cut and then add those. Paste, and then now I'm going to go into my render, and I'm going to change my render setup this time. So I don't want the spaceship to render anymore. I only want those little weird things I made, those polygons for the engine. So what I'll do is make sure I have that selected. So that was the engine exhaust, and I'm going to go into my render setup. So with the render setup, I'm going to make a new setup, and we'll call that engine exhaust, or just engine. And I'm going to add a new collection. So right click, create collection, and I'll just add the engine exhaust. So if I turn that on and do a test render now, let's go to about here. And Arnold render, and hit play. That's what I should see, just this thing. So it should render very quickly because it's just these cubes going in space. So I'm gonna render. So render. It's gonna go to that same location. I'll render that sequence, and yes, it's spitting those out very quickly for me. Let's add our spaceship. So in After Effects, I'm going to go into my project. So you'll notice you'll get stuck in the After Effects the effects layer, or the effects window on any of the layers that you're currently selected, until you go over here and click on project, and you'll show just the assets and stuff that you've been working on. Before I even open anything else, I'm going to save this. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and I'm going to put this inside of the same place I was working for my other stuff. So I'm going to go into my work volume. Here's what I had, and for my advanced animation, Tuesday, Thursday, space, scenes. I'll put those in the same spot, and that's space. All right. Next step. I'm going to go and import those 2 render files that I just did. So I'm going to go to import file, going into my work volume, same location that we were just in, and under my images, Spaceship, it's a sequence, import that, and then again import the other sequence, which is my engine, import that. Now I have these 2. Taking both of those, I'm going to drag those to my top layer. And now, if I hit play, okay, so this is showing up and blasting by the camera. Now, my colors seem a little wonky on this compared to my background. How can we fix that? Well, let's go into curves again. Let's drag curves onto this Starship layer. And now we can play around. So the blues, maybe the blues are way off on this ship. So let's pull that down. Let's see if the reds can help. And I think once I mess with my engine light, this actually might look okay. Let's see what we could do. So let's turn this one off for a second. We can see there's my engine, and that looks weird. So we're going to fix that by adding a blur. So I'm just going to use a Gaussian blur, drag that directly on to my layer, and it's not going to look like anything happened yet until I increase the blurriness. Okay, I'm also going to go into glow. So I'm going to drag glow onto that layer as well. I'm going to crank that glow radius. I'm going to increase my intensity and the threshold. And we should have, when this goes in front of it, the spaceship, a glow happening on the back of that engine. So some stuff I would change if I were to keep going with this, but I think this is good. And now when that goes, that glow feels like it's on the back of that engine. So yeah, I would have changed a little bit of that stuff, but that's pretty good. We're only going to see it for a second when it goes by. Not even. It's going to be a millisecond for a frame. So these match up until really that one last shot where we can see the cube. So I think that's going to be okay. Let's say that if this is coming from away from us, maybe that glow on this should be smaller. So what I'm going to do is, first thing about how it's going to come out of the teleport. So I'm going to put in another layer here. So new solid. So why am I making these solids? These solids are what I need to be able to exist to be able to add effects. So I can't put a flare down on its own. It has to have a layer it goes onto. So if I put it onto a layer, it will go on like another layer that I don't want to affect, and that would cause issues. So I'm going to add another flare. I'm going to put that. So I want it to be where the spaceship comes from. So I'm just moving this around. It's pretty good. Let's see, should it be a 50 or 35? I think 35, or let's use this one. I'm going to increase the brightness of it, and I'm going to change this to be, again, blending mode of screen. Okay. So let's start this animation. Let's say that, so if this is a 5-second animation, let's say 1 second goes by where we're just establishing what we're looking at, and then the flare comes in. So that means that the spaceship won't start until a little bit later. So let's set a keyframe for my flare of the brightness right at this point, right before the spaceship shows up. Before that, I don't want this flare to exist, so I'll drop the brightness down to 0. And now when this plays, it shows up. Maybe that's a little bit too quick. How do we adjust keyframes? If we open up and drill down in the effects, you'll notice, oh, there's my flare for my black solid. Let's call this, I'm just going to rename this. So I'm going to right click and hit rename, wormhole. And I'm going to move this. So I'm going to take this and drag this over. So now it takes a little bit of time to open up. Maybe when it opens up, it's not just like a really bright light. It goes beyond that for a split second, and then it shrinks back down. So maybe it's this really bright thing, and then after that, we bring it back down a little bit, and then let's maybe have it dissipate into nothing after that. So let's go like this. Okay, let's see what this does. So it's kind of like it's popping out of nowhere, right? So, okay, it's starting to have some stuff. Now the flare brightness, we can change all sorts of these settings in here too. There's a lot of other stuff that we could do. I'm just trying to get you guys some basic stuff. So this shows up. That ship, that glow, looks like crap from that distance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust, and let me rename that one so we can see ship glow. And that one would be ship. So when this ship starts to show up out of the teleporter, I want my glow to have a very small radius and the intensity to be small. So right now I liked where it was when it comes by, maybe around here. So that tells me that maybe I should set a keyframe for these things if I like it, and then go back in time and then reduce that down. So now I'm going to shrink that down to like nothing. And so when I hit the play button, let's see how that works. It's there, but that's not just the glow, that's my blur. So I'll go to where I liked that one spot, which in my effects, it's telling me it was right there. So I'm also going to hit a keyframe of my blurriness, go back in time, and then drop that down to 0. So now when I scroll through, it's kind of smaller and then it gets bigger. Not a huge amount, but I think it's just enough where it's not super, super intense. Now there's other things we can do to this to make it feel like it's not super intense. We can go into our transform. I can go into my opacity. So I'm going to keep opacity here at 100, but then go back in time and drop that down. What that's going to do for me is make it so it's less obvious, and then it starts to become more obvious as we get closer to the spot. So you'll notice I can control that right here too. So that's at 100 here. Let's actually go to maybe around here and drop that down some more. So now it's increasing as we get closer to it. So just some little quick tweaks in that. To set keyframes, it's that little stopwatch button. And we can move those around just by left clicking and dragging those if we don't like that. So now that I have this stuff, let's just add one more thing to this animation, and we'll add sound. I'm going to go into my ship layer, and I'm going to add a blur, or a motion blur. So I'm going to use pixel motion blur. I'm going to add that to my ship. And we'll have to let this scrub through to process it. And you'll notice it's blurring this out now for me. That's good when we get past the ship. So if I go and look at my pixel motion blur right here, I want this to be shutter samples of 5, so we'll key that to be on, but maybe when it's further back, I'll turn that down to off. So 1 or 0. So 1 should bring it down to barely any processing on that. And you'll notice by doing this, it should increase as it goes closer. So we should see it barely blurred out, and then it starts to get blurry as it moves faster and further away. So we should have something now like that. Okay. Last but not least, let's add sound. I have provided for you guys sound in here, and that is going to be inside of the file that I've given you, and that's going to be underneath your sound. And I got these things, which for whatever reason take 8 years to load up. So we have thunder. We have deep engine noise, so it's sort of a hum. I, for whatever reason, have 2 copies of this. So spaceship sounds. It's like dimensional ambience, whatever that means. There's that one. And okay, so all these, I'm going to use that one first. So I'm going to go over to my project, click on that. Let's bring in some of these sounds. So this one, let that load in. Put that on the bottom, and let's play. It's delayed, right? So what I like to do is when I'm playing, and I know where that sound really starts in my timeline, I can just grab this from that point and then move it to where you think it should visually be. So if I know that that sound is starting over here, let's drag it from right here, my left mouse button, drag it over to about that point. Now, too early. Getting there. So it's a matter of just playing around with these. So we'll say that that's okay for now. Let's say we don't want to hear this stuff early. So we can sort of hear some stuff going on before this ship even exists, right? So let's say around here we shouldn't hear anything. If I open this up, you should see audio. Audio levels at 00 dB. That's the average that it came in. Don't crank that. Instead, let's say we'll start here. I'll hit a stopwatch and I'll go back in time, and this should be 0. Or negative 192. That means that's a level that we can't hear anymore. If I hit play, there we go. So now, the way this works, it's at 0 decibels. That's what you should see for sound to work. And at negative 191, our human ears can't hear it, so it's gone. So easy way to be able to turn that on and off to have that happen. Now let's add thunder. So we'll add that. Drag that in. And I'm going to drag this one in. Also going to rename it to Thunder so I can understand what that one is. Thunfer. There we go. And now I'm going to open this one up, and I'm going to turn this one off so I don't have to hear that engine go by. Okay. Okay, so it's about here. So this is also why headphones are awesome, so you don't have to hear everybody doing that. I'm going to go move this about to this point. Let's see what this does. let's add that other layer. So we're starting to layer these things up. Now, this still sucks. That thunder sounds like it's in a giant empty space. If it's inside of, or as in space with you know, the ability for sound to travel. Sound doesn't travel very well in space, so as much as we're using this for an effect, let's make this go away a little bit quicker. So I'm going to make sure my audio levels are keyed so it stays at that level and then fades out a little bit more at the end. So we'll go 192 maybe right here. So let's hit play. That seems weird. So let's move around these keyframes. I'm just going to left click, drag, so I have a marquee select. And then if sound takes longer than light, maybe this will be better. So let's add a little bit longer on that keyframe there. So it's looking like it's opening and closing maybe. And we can keep layering some other stuff in there. So I have in sound, let's put some deep space. That one. Dragging that one in. And deep space, we'll put this in the bottom. I usually like to have my ambience all the way in the bottom. So it's hard to hear it, but it's just that little bit of ambience there. I might actually continue this a little bit longer to see if this helps. Maybe this also is at 0, and so now I don't know. I'm just messing around with this. So there's a lot we can do with this. There's space portal sounds and all those fun things you can download. Where was the other one that I had? Yeah. We'll use that. All right, we'll throw this one in. We'll put this one underneath this, and that is really weird how that's working. I'm going to delete these keyframes on that thunder because it's really weird how that was working. All right, let's see what this does. Okay, so I like that. I'm going to keep the thunder in. I just want that weird hum sound to go away. So this hum, which is right there, let's just reduce that sound. So audio levels there, and then maybe there. So let's see what this does. So we're layering those things. I think that thunder goes on way too long at this point. We'll definitely kill that at. Let's key this, and then the longer you have between these frames, the less weird it's going to be. If it's very abrupt, it's going to. I'm going to say that's okay. So we can have like lightning sounds or something happening on there. But what the takeaway on this is, we have our object, we have our different universe things going on in the background, we have glow going on, we have a lot of different things happening to make this effect, and it really doesn't take a long time. It just takes some practice. So I'm going to render this. Composition, add to media encoder queue. And remember, when we render these things, if Adobe wants to cooperate, There we go. The main takeaway with the Adobe Media Encoder queue is you're looking at what the timeline is for the composition. If this thing is telling you it's going to be a 30-second animation that you're about to render out, you're going to have a lot of black frames at the end. We only want this to go for as long as we set this up for. So it should be only from 0 to 5 for seconds. And we can confirm that with composition settings too. It's saying it's only going to go to 5. And in the media encoder, it should say the same thing. So once this happens, come on, Beeple. Okay. You guys have all encountered this fun thing where it takes some time. Come on, buddy. You can do it. You can do it. Oh, there you go. Okay. I'm going to remove one of these, and then let's look at what this makes. So under Comp 1, let's see what this thing pops up as. Okay. This is saying 0 to 5. If you play through this thing and you're seeing all sorts of black frames after that, there's a problem. We don't want that to happen. So this is what I wanted to have. It's got an export video, export audio. Let's give it a different name. We're going to put this under movies. And my first space adventure. Save. We're going to use, let's use maximum render quality, export video and audio, and hit OK, and then hit play. That's how you will finish this one up. Goodbye.